one thing is clear.
We have not Ukrainian troops in the territory of the Russian Federation, but we have Russian troops in the territory of the Ukrainian Federation.
Это правда.
After Elon Musk buys Twitter for $44 billion, the current head of the company admits its future is uncertain. All of that and much, much more coming up right here on Impact. Hello and welcome. As the war in Ukraine rages on into its third month, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is trying to end it with a peace mission to Moscow today. He's been meeting the Russian leader Vladimir Putin before travelling, discussing how to coordinate and step up the supply of weapons to Ukraine. Well, let's cross over to Kyiv to my colleague, Ben Brown.
Hello from Kyiv. Well, as the war here...
Missiles launched into Ukraine amid fears of where this conflict might go next. This morning, Russia's foreign minister welcomed the UN Secretary-General as he arrived in Moscow. As critics question and...
I don't think that that right now there is an imminent threat of escalation. I think that what the West is doing to support its allies in Ukraine is very well calibrated.
Defence ministers from NATO and Europe around both sides continue to go on the offensive. Ukrainian forces used a missile system to destroy 4 Russian tanks around Izium. Russia, meanwhile, released footage of its missiles hitting a military storage facility. Said they had to try.
But it is my deep conviction that the sooner we end this war, the better for the people of Ukraine, for the people of the Russian Federation and those far beyond.
Some kind of negotiation may eventually bring this conflict to an end, but for the moment those involved in the fighting are still seeking to strengthen their position by inflicting damage on the battlefield first. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
To end the war.
As Secretary-General of the United Nations, I came to Moscow as a messenger of peace. My objective and my agenda is strictly linked to save the people of Ukraine, for the people of the Russian Federation and those far beyond.
Well, let's get the very latest on the talks from our correspondent in Moscow, Jenny Hill. And Jenny, Antonio Guterres said the...
prolong this conflict, but also seeking to exacerbate this conflict by providing weapons and aid to Ukraine. It's a very common narrative here. Russians are told almost every hour of every day that the West is the real enemy here and that it is now... We know that its stated aim is to take the whole of the Donbass region. If you look at where it's actually pushing, you can see that perhaps its real aims are a little bit further than that. But there doesn't seem to me here to be much of a sense of real commitment to peace talks. And actually, let me just add that...
Now, Jenny, there you mentioned Russian antagonism and anger, really, about the support, the military support that the West is giving Ukraine. I guess that anger will be only increased by that meeting in Germany today of about 40 NATO and EU.
Starting to become a bit of a narrative here, actually. You have to bear in mind that Vladimir Putin sought to justify his invasion of Ukraine by not only saying that the Russian-speaking populations in the east of the country needed defending against a murderous regime in Kyiv, but pointed to Russians as examples of Western aggression against Russia.
Jenny, thank you very much indeed for that analysis. That's Jenny Hill there, our correspondent in Moscow. Well, Russian forces withdrew from northern Ukraine.
That doesn't tell of war. We travelled to the northern edge of the country. Senkivka, the last village by the border with Russia and Belarus. It's still being shelled. I've run out of tears. On the road outside, another rocket. Experts who've seen these images say they could have held cluster bombs. Banned in other parts of the world because of the devastation they cause. Both Russia in a matter of minutes. This video from Ukraine's border guard shows Russian forces rolling into Senkivka in February. For Lydia Belosova, who's 91, it was the second time in her life seeing tanks.
Friends with Russia and Belarus for years.
People from our countries visited each other, married each other.
From almost everyone we spoke to, we heard about friendships and families spread across borders that have now been broken. BBC News, Senkivka.
Now, let me just tell you about what's happening here in Kyiv this afternoon, because they are trying to tear down and dismantle a Soviet-era statue not too far from where I'm talking this afternoon. A very symbolic moment. That is the latest from the Ukrainian capital, and hand you back now to the studio in London.
Ben Brown there, my colleague in Kyiv, and of course, as and when that statue does finally fall, the friendship statue.
So this was him addressing his troops at this big military parade that they had in Pyongyang in the capital last night. And as you said, he really made a commitment to his troops and his people to pursue the development of nuclear weapons at what he said would war. So prevent it from being attacked and essentially to keep the peace, a nuclear deterrent. But what he said last night is that North Korea wouldn't be afraid to move on from this primary purpose, as he called it, to a secondary purpose, and suggesting really that he would use nuclear weapons, destroy its nuclear weapons before it has the chance to use them, what they call a preemptive strike. And this is Kim Jong-un's way of saying that they would not be afraid to use their nuclear weapons on another army if this were to happen.
Top energy firm about restricting the flow of gas funds to Russia. Join me, Aaron Heselhurst, on Talking Business Weekly, here on BBC World News.
In Myanmar, we go inside the resistance.
In terms of what is happening in Ukraine is very, very different. So what can these meetings achieve? What can Antonio Guterres achieve during his time in Moscow? Let's talk to Lee Turner, who's a former British ambassador to Ukraine. Lee, you're also writing a book called The Hit.
Dozens, hundreds of people every day. And as your correspondent has just been saying, the initial indications are not good coming out of Moscow. We've not seen any signs since the beginning of this war by Russia on the 24th of February that they are interested in any kind of negotiated solution. And it remains difficult to see how Putin can agree to any outcome of this war which doesn't end up with Russia.
The time when Crimea was annexed, when we had the separatist states and the separatist movements within the Donbass region. I wonder whether there was more should have been done at that point in order to prevent that from happening.
Ukraine a perspective of joining NATO because they feared provoking Russia, and so Ukraine was rejected. It's impossible to know what would have happened if Ukraine had come closer to NATO in 2008. But what we saw in...
So I just picking up then specifically on that point, your experience there, you know the country, you know the area. When you hear Russia say things like Russian speakers are, they need to protect Russian speakers in those...
The period 2008 to 2012 were living peacefully and happily and building up their economy, doing very well. It is only since the Russian invasion of 2014 of eastern Ukraine that the Russian speakers of East...
The world's richest man, Elon Musk, he'll pay around $44 billion for control of the social media network and plans to relax some of the restrictions on what its 300 million users can post. Our technology reporter, Shona McCann.
If Musk's idea of free speech is to prevail, it would likely mean less moderation. It could mean controversial figures who've been banned, like Donald Trump, get reinstated.
Having a public platform that is...
And if you want to get in touch with me on Twitter, it's at Kasia Madeira. Bye-bye.
Hello there. Ahead of the southwest monsoon, the main story, of course, at this over the next few days. Satellite picture earlier showed some areas of cloud and there could be one or two storms around, but on the whole it's going to be fine, dry and sunny. We've still got a few heavier showers perhaps across the far northeastern states of India, but generally dry. Heat wave turn. For many, it will be dry and sunny. The heat building across Central Asia. Still got heat wave conditions across large parts of Pakistan. And also in the northwest of India, we're likely to find some dust storms by the end of the week into the weekend.
बीमार्क मस्टर्ड ऑयल मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट द्वारा बनाया गया करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा परखा आजमाया गया द मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट सिंस 1933 बरसों से सरसों
Air to the air. Turkish Airlines.
कैसी हंसी मुस्कानों की धुन जिंदगी मक्खन खोलो ढक्कन
In Myanmar, we go inside the resistance, a people's army prepared to sacrifice everything to restore democracy. Our world, Myanmar, inside the resistance on BBC World News.
The conversation around miscarriage is starting to open up with things like this pregnancy loss exhibition. Having suffered several losses myself,
This is BBC World News. I'm Kasia Madeira. Our main headlines. The UN Secretary General who
Would you pay to use Twitter? Might subscriptions be the path to profit under the new ownership of Elon Musk? Will continue to soar this year, hitting all of us in our pockets. Hello and welcome to World Business Report. I'm Tig Enright. Well, let's start with that blockbuster deal. The tech Musk does have a personal fortune worth $273 billion. He's not paying for it all out of his own pocket, with a consortium of banks extending $13 billion worth of loans to finance the transaction. Well, earlier I asked Justin...
It's actually been really rather left behind. But it is astonishingly influential, has a lot of political users, apart from, of course, a certain ex-US president who's currently banned. In fact, the next generation coming up, speak to them. Would they be using Twitter? They're not really. Fascinating, isn't it? Because the controversy that Twitter had, obviously, with then banning Mr. Trump. It's going to be interesting if that's going to continue. I suspect if he's, and this man is no fool, he'll be selecting his shareholders quite clearly on the basis of saying, are you going to be able to support fashion fad is next year's tank top when it comes to this sort of technology. He's paying a lot of money for it, but he must have something up his sleeve. Either that or he is a mad collector of toy businesses, which he just enjoys having because he's so wealthy.
Justin Urquhart Stewart there and his cat with his... Me now from Washington DC is Peter Nagel, who's a senior economist at the World Bank and one of the authors of this report. Thanks for being with us today, Peter. Let's talk first of all about the impact on ordinary people suffering from this cost of living crisis. Your forecast suggests
very large economic and humanitarian effects. Households across the world are feeling the cost of living crisis. And we're particularly worried about the poorest households since they spend a larger share of their income on food and energy. So they're particularly vulnerable. But of course, it takes time for the crop to grow and be harvested. And so in the near term, the food crisis could be quite severe. But as you said, that will start to ease pressures towards next year.
To manufacture the much-hyped battery-operated F-150 pickup truck, the most popular car in America, is going electric. Tesla dominates the electric car market. U.S. car manufacturers are playing catch-up. Ford is taking a big gamble.
Ford believes that if customers buy into this, well, then drivers here are ready to go electric.
I love driving the electric.
This is a big car.
Right. Yeah, it is.
Electric cars? Are you interested in electric cars? Oh, I'm seeing nodding over here. Hold on.
I want to do it right now again, but she doesn't know. She's scared.
Maybe somewhere down the line, but not now. Like he said, there's not enough charging stations, and I think there's still things that...
छाए मुस्कानों की धुन जिंदगी मक्खन खोलो ढक्कन डूबी-डूबी-डू जिंदगी मक्खन
Amul butter.
Потрібну силу.
But it wasn't always like this. Before the Russian attack, questions were being asked as to whether Zelensky, a former comedian, really had what it takes to lead Ukraine.
Hi, Jonah. Hi.
Hello there, I'm Gavin Ramshawn and this is Sport Today, live from the BBC Sports Centre. Coming up on the programme, Wimbledon organisers stand by the decision to ban Russian at Tuesday's briefing.
They were reiterating their view from last week when the decision was first announced that it was the only viable option, a very complex decision, members of the All England Club board said. They know they're faced by opposition from the likes of the condemnation from over 140 countries at the United Nations, the fact that there has been government guidance to encourage, although not to compel, this decision as well.
And Russell, the green light's been given for unvaccinated players to play at the championships as well. Moving on to Emma Raducanu, Russell, who, of course, burst onto the scene at last year's Wimbledon Championships and has made a massive name for herself, has parted company with her coach. So what does she have to say about that?
She'll be looking for a fourth partnership. Yes, they've been hindered by a few injury problems along the way, the fact that Raducanu caught COVID just before Christmas, and that meant that pre-season preparations were ruined. But it's another very swift decision to move on. These decisions...
League leaders Manchester City take on Real Madrid, who are at the top of La Liga in the first leg at the Etihad. While Real are in the semi-finals for the 10th occasion in 12 years, this is the third time in 7 seasons that City have reached the last 4. Stage of the competition.
We're very close to playing another final of the most important competition in the world, and we're worried because we're facing a very strong team. We are used to this because in this...
Al Horford then later went on to score the rebound for Boston. The Celtics will face either the defending champions, the Milwaukee Bucks, or the Chicago Bulls next. The Bucks have a 3-1 lead in that series. Raptors are now 3-2 behind. Game 6 is in Toronto on Friday. And in the Western Conference, there was a very one-sided game as Dallas beat the Utah Jazz 102-77. Luka Doncic scored 30 on Liège Monument Classic. The quick-step team rider was rushed to hospital after a huge pileup near the front of the main bunch in Sunday's race. After suffering 2 broken ribs and a collapsed lung, his team say he'll remain in hospital for the time being. It's also been confirmed that Team. She went on to defend her title in Beijing earlier this year. Kim says it's been a draining year, but plans to return to try and win a 3rd Olympic gold. Finally, Ronnie O'Sullivan has taken a 6-2 lead in his quarter-final match.
बीमार्क मस्टर्ड ऑयल मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट द्वारा बनाया गया करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा परखा आजमाया गया द मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट सिंस 1933 बरसों से सरसों
3 नए रंग में ढला ये मेरा चीज है
My name is Basim Zawde. I just saw how rich the city is, like in art and architecture and culture and traditions. After this alleyway, we would go right, then we would go left. Then you would see just the door of an old facade of a school. And then if you look just left, you would see a beautiful pattern. 700-year-old patterns, just covered with graffiti. They could have done it on a lot of other places. Why just here, on top of them? And look at these 2 beautiful schools, Al-Khatuniya and Al-Sukrukiya. You can see the history of the city literally fading away. The purpose of this project is to document and digitalize the Islamic. After taking 3 photos from 3 angles, I would be importing them to this program so I can take the mutual points and then create an orthogonal photo. So I'd have a very sharp 2D version of the pattern. I wish I could be positive, hoping good things for the future of Lebanon and Tripoli, but the problem is that we are losing a lot of good minds traveling and immigrating everywhere in the world.
Show, your essential guide wherever you're heading, every weekend on BBC World News. The Travel Show, sponsored.
Hello, this is Impact. I'm Kasia Madeira. The United Nations chief on a peace mission to Moscow. He tells the war in Ukraine rages on into its 3rd month. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is trying to end it with a peace mission to Moscow. He's meeting with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin. He'll then travel to Kyiv later this week. But hopes of any kind.
Hello, welcome from Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. Well, as the war here rages on into its 3rd month, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is trying to end it with a peace mission today to Moscow. He's meeting the Russian.
Facing the complex situation in Ukraine, different interpretations about what's happening in Ukraine. But that does not limit the possibility to have a very serious dialogue on how best we can work to minimize the suffering.
Into World War III, claims this morning dismissed by a British minister.
I don't think that that right now there is an imminent threat of escalation. I think that what the West is doing to support its allies in
facility. Mariupol is expected to be one focus of the talks today in Moscow. Subject to enormous devastation in recent weeks, there is pressure for a humanitarian corridor to allow people to leave. There is
for the people of the Russian Federation and those far beyond.
Some kind of negotiation may eventually bring this conflict to an end, but for the moment those involved in the fighting are still seeking to strengthen their position by inflicting damage on.
To talk, Sergei Lavrov said, well, Moscow had agreed to the UN's request for its Secretary General to come and talk, but that was about it. And I think we do have to question whether Moscow is genuinely serious about Kremlin. Very difficult to see really how anyone is supposed to negotiate a peace treaty. Mr. Lavrov has said that he thinks hostilities will end in a negotiated treaty, but he's also said that the terms of such an agreement would be very much defined than that. But there doesn't seem to me here to be much of a sense of real commitment to peace talks. And actually, let me just add that while Mr. Lavrov was meeting Mr. Guterres, Vladimir Putin was handing out medals to Olympic athletes. Seeing
in Germany today of about 40 NATO and EU countries who are meeting to discuss how to step up and better coordinate their weapons supplies to Ukraine.
Yes, and I mean, if you look at state television, the Western responses to Vladimir Putin's invasion, and not just the supply of weapons and aid, but also sanctions and international condemnation, all of those are taken and presented to Russians as examples of Western aggression.
Remaining residents say they are living in fear, as our correspondent Yogita Lemay reports.
Barely a highway in Ukraine that doesn't tell of war. We travelled to the northern edge of the country. Inside, another rocket. Experts who've seen these images say they could have held cluster bombs. Banned in other parts of the world because of the devastation they cause. Both Russia and Ukraine are accused of using them. From Ukraine's border guard shows Russian forces rolling into Senkivka in February. For Lydia Belosova, who's 91, it was the second time in her life seeing tanks at her doorstep. She remembers hiding cut her brother who lives in Belarus out of her life because he doesn't believe what she's told him, what's really happening. After we left, there were multiple grenade explosions here. No one was hurt, but the threat is constant.
Development of physical culture and sport. As Jenny Hill was telling us from Moscow, the President has got several engagements in Moscow today before he meets the UN Secretary-General. And just reading between the lines, Jenny was telling us the UN Secretary-General has been meeting, though, Sergei Lavrov, who has warned NATO to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine, saying that NATO is fighting a proxy war here in Ukraine and saying that there is a danger of igniting a third world
parade that they had in Pyongyang, in the capital, last night. And as you said, he really made a commitment to his troops and his people to pursue the development of nuclear weapons at what he said was maximum speed. So really you have here a Korea wouldn't be afraid to move on from this primary purpose, as he called it, to a secondary purpose, and suggesting really that he would use nuclear weapons to annihilate, to destroy any military that threatened or provoked North Korea.
Are really vulnerable to the sun. And there's one major problem. I live in Abuja, Nigeria. It gets really hot here. And with climate change, things are getting worse. I believe climate change has a strong...
His new owner, Elon Musk, that he must comply with new digital rules or risk fines or even a ban. Now, this comes after the company's board accepted a takeover offer from Mr. Musk. He'll pay around $44 billion for control of the social media network.
Pop stars, sports people and world leaders. And Twitter was one of the first platforms to give them the power to connect to you and I instantly. One of the most prolific tweeters is, of course, Elon Musk himself. He took to Twitter to announce that
his approach going to change things. Let's talk to the tech journalist Will Guyatts. And Will, before we talk about change, you didn't believe it would even happen. You said you'd eat your hat on air if he went for it.
Yes, Saturday night in the UK, I'm going to be eating an awful lot of hat to run independently, but companies like Tesla want to grow their market in China and in Asia. They want to grow their market in other countries. There's all sorts of things that come from owning a social network, and the speed of this transaction has taken everybody by surprise, not just tech people.
About that level of free speech that someone like Donald Trump will make a return?
Bear in mind I've eaten my hat for not believing it was happening, but I actually have a strong belief that will be one of the first things that Elon Musk will try to do to show that he's running this platform differently. The biggest challenge is work for him. It's a really interesting dynamic here. The cult of Elon Musk, loads of people love him, loads of people hate him. It's like the food Marmite in the UK. You either love it or you hate it. And that's what's happening with Elon Musk. And this could be the greatest moment for Twitter, or it could be...
How is this one person going to change that?
Maybe he thinks he's got better scientists, better data people, better engineers. Maybe he thinks he can shake up the whole company by going in and turning the HQ in San Francisco into a homeless hostel, as he suggested on Twitter itself.
Go to Tokyo's manuscript writing cafe with an understanding that they can't leave until their work is finished. Rachel Stanton reports.
You may think this is your normal everyday cafe, but this is
like you're being watched from behind. But actually, instead of monitoring customers, I'm here to support them. As a result, what they thought would take a day actually was completed in 3 hours, or the tasks that usually take 3 hours were done in 1 hour at this cafe.
Today, lots more, as always, on our website, and do stay with us on BBC World News because we've got lots more coverage of all the different elements coming from Ukraine, of course. This is the live page, which is continuously updated by my colleagues who are in Ukraine and as well. So my team will be keeping you up to date for that. Thanks for watching.
Hello there. Ahead of the southwest monsoon, the main story, of course, fine, dry and sunny. We've still got a few heavier showers, perhaps across the far northeastern states of India, but generally dry. Heat wave warnings in force for central and northern parts of India in particular. And we're going to find the heat building actually across Central Asia as well. Still got some across Central Asia, still got heat wave conditions across large parts of Pakistan, and also in the northwest of India. We're likely to find some dust storms by the end of the week into the weekend.
खुश है ये आसमान जमीन हर तरफ छाए हैं हम ही ऐसी कूल है अपनी कहानी झिल करके जीनी जवानी.
Our global food system is under profound pressure from climate change, population growth, and fractured supply chains.
But might these shocks to our system actually be a catalyst for positive change? We have to wake up and
understand it and find out what is really going on.
BBC World News America.
What we hope and pray that finally after 40 years the people of Afghanistan will have peace and stability.
Welcome, you're watching BBC World News. I'm Kasia Madeira. Our main headlines. The UN Security countries allied to NATO have been meeting in Germany to discuss supplying extra military aid to Ukraine. It comes as the German government authorised the supply of around 50 anti-aircraft tanks to Ukraine. North Korea's leader has vowed to speed up his country's
nation. He peddles a Moscow-centric version of history which draws on centuries of Russian imperialism. His invasion of Ukraine is about much more than military supremacy. It's about culture, language, identity and values too, to the defence of Ukraine. See yourself right now? How should we see you?
First of all, you don't need to split. I'm certainly a musician in my life, and I hope I will be a musician till the end of my life, because that's what I love. But then...
What is life like for you right now? What are you doing day to day?
It's very hard to describe because actually it's very chaotic. And hospitals and people who heal our soldiers, but also civilians who suffer from wounds and injuries given by Russian weapons. These called Barvinkova, and it's near the front line in the Kharkiv region. And I saw him with a AK-74 machine gun and with some grenades, and I asked him why he needs them.
To play music for people where you are. I know I've seen videos of you playing in metro stations, in communities which have been hit by Russian rockets and missiles. When do you choose?
Teaches emotions, if I must say this. And I sing my songs, and I say the words that I want them to hear. Depending on the situations. Sometimes, for example, like today, I was singing at everybody, not necessarily your fans, because not everybody is a fan of our music. But I think every Ukrainian needs support, and that's what we're trying to say them. I always say them that if you are not our fan, committed to come and to commit atrocities in my country and killing my people, he's my enemy. So I don't care. So it's not about music and your attitude, somebody's attitude to your music. It's how you feel. I need to admit that fear is a fundamental instinct, which I think most people in the world have and possess. And if you don't have fear, then maybe something is wrong with your mind. That's what I'm trying to do. So I certainly understand that some places I'm in are dangerous. And for example, today in the morning, we had two very, very serious hits by Russian missiles or rockets. Come to see soldiers, to raise their morale. You can't show them that you fear more than them. They do. So somehow I cope with it. And yes, if you go somewhere to a dangerous place, you somehow...
Emotions while writing that you do now, and you've been very open. You say, I'm feeling something new. I'm feeling hatred. And I know that you've written a poem which begins, where have you come from, my hatred? Is this something that you
These atrocities, some people even call it genocide, because there is no other explanation for me why Russian soldiers commit these atrocities and make this massacre they did in Bucha and Borodyanka.
For all Russian people?
Thanks, Stephen, for this question. It's not an easy question. Certainly, there are some, first of all, there are friends of mine who, or let's say people who I say kind of people. These people who were okay, doing okay till February 24th, and then suddenly they realized that they are in a big trouble because they are, at this point of view, if it came just out of the blue, all of a sudden, but it's not. All of these people were silent when Putin came to power. All of these people were silent when he started a war, a war against Georgia and provocations, and then actually de facto annexation of part of Russian lands, Georgian lands. All these people were silent and were okay living their good lives in Moscow and Petersburg. And then suddenly when he imposed this bloody war in Donbass. So many of them were silent.
There are Russian artists and creatives right now who are really, suffering because the world is now saying, you know what, we don't want to hear from him. Is simply not right. I wonder what your position on that is.
I completely agree that you couldn't force artists to show or to express their political position. But it's not political position, commits atrocities. Nobody asks you to support this or that political leader, and I completely agree with it. But we are not talking about politics. We are talking about positions which people choose in their thing, that we cannot divide people into their jobs or occupations, where we should divide people with their values. Those who support terrorists, those who support villains, those who fight till we are sure that our children have a good future.
You say you're confident of victory, confident of a long-term independent Ukraine, but my question is, after this terrible war, what will that going to be your future?
Thank you for this question. It's not an easy question because I'm not an oracle. I cannot predict the whole future. I agree with the President Zelensky to the extent that basic values. But because Ukrainians have this gene of freedom in the blood, and actually the existence of this gene of freedom in our blood is probably the soul leading Ukraine today. So he needs the support of the whole world, and Ukraine needs this support, and we give it as much as we can. Second, frankly speaking, I considered to join politics seriously, but I never wanted to be a musician till the end of my life. And because music and freedom, these are two most important genes in my blood, in my DNA, if I may say, and they make me as a person. I like today Ukraine faces. You need to put aside some things that you love, and you do what your country needs. Because I also want my country to become a prosperous, democratic, independent in all.
And thanks for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much. And
the day. Reality check. Get the facts straight.
From that, we do have colder air coming down from Canada, particularly chilly for the time of year in the upper Midwest. Temperatures are going to be rising though across parts of Kansas, Oklahoma and Texas. Critical fire risk set to return here. Some weakening weather fronts are moving down into the northwest. South America, we've still got some cloud left around Uruguay and the River Plate. Not so much rain. There's certainly some welcome rain on the way though on Tuesday for Santiago. There's more rain to come in Spain. It's going to be very wet in the next few days across these more eastern areas. northeastern states of India. 1 or 2 heavy showers further south, but the general story is the heat that is continuing to build ahead of the southwesterly monsoon. Heat wave conditions across large parts of India and also Pakistan. Now, the weather is going to be drying off in Perth. These bands of rain are pushing their way through Western Australia. It's drying off in the interior because this rain is moving down into New South Wales. As it turns wetter here, it's getting drier in Queensland. Over the
It was too early to talk about mediation.
It is my deep conviction that the sooner we end this war, the better.
As for our geopolitical space, it was done in the interests of...
Hello from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Well, as the war here rages on into its 3rd month, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is trying to end the conflict with a peace mission to Moscow today. He's meeting the Russian leader Vladimir Putin.
UN's top official stressed dialogue is vital.
I know that we have today, in facing the complex situation in Ukraine, different interpretations about what's happening in Ukraine.
Weakened, so it could not carry out another invasion again. On the ground, both sides continue to go on the offensive. Ukrainian forces used a missile system to destroy 4 Russian tanks around Izium.
Far beyond.
Some kind of negotiation may eventually bring this conflict to an end. But for the moment, those involved in the fighting are still seeking to strengthen their position by inflicting damage on the battlefield first. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Russia's view of its actions in Ukraine is completely different to what the UN see of Russia's actions in Ukraine, and had to say, you know, he's made a couple of proposals about trying to set up joint groups to facilitate among them the fact that Sergei Lavrov himself has said there'll be no ceasefire until a negotiated treaty is finally signed. No pause of hostilities while negotiations continue. Perhaps another reason, the fact that a little earlier we heard from Russia and Belarus that UN Secretary General waits to sit down and hold talks with him.
All right, Jenny, thank you very much indeed. That's Jenny Hill with the latest for us from Moscow. Well, Russian forces withdrew from northern Ukraine at the beginning of...
Last village by the border with Russia and Belarus. It's still being shelled. Only a few of its residents remain. Nina Malenok is living with a rocket that landed right in her... But here at the northern edge, we're just about 2 miles from the border, and Russian soldiers withdrew from here around 3 weeks ago. But the feeling very much is that it could all change in a matter of minutes.
After a series of explosions in the separatist region of Transnistria, do you think there is a risk of spillover of the conflict to Moldova? And my second question is, after this big meeting about Putin may become restless and threaten again to use a nuclear weapon?
Well, on the issue of spillover,
Was about the risk for Putin to threaten to use nuclear.
well, you know, you've heard us say a number of times that that kind of rhetoric is very won't engage it.
Our next question goes to Suzanne Geilhard from ZDF.
Mr. Secretary, what military aid do you now expect?
You know, Germany announced that it was going to provide 50 Cheetah systems. I think those systems will provide real capability for Ukraine. And in terms of what else Germany will do going forward, again, that's to prosecute this fight.
Our next question goes to John Ismay, New York Times.
Mr. Secretary, yesterday you mentioned that one of the United States' goals in Ukraine now was to see Russia
Russia has, in terms of its land forces, their land forces have been attrited in a very significant way. Casualties are pretty substantial. They've lost a lot of equipment. They've used a lot of precision guided. Have the same type of capability to bully their neighbors that we saw at the outset of this conflict.
Next question goes to Ute Spangenberger from ARD.
Maintaining an open door, so I don't want to speculate on what could come. I do believe that in the future, if the possibility exists, I think Ukraine will seek to.
Mindful of our time, goes to Uwe Driesen from TV2 Denmark. Uwe.
Thanks. Mr. Secretary, the Russian foreign minister has warned that there's a danger of a third world war.
So there's always a possibility that a number of things can happen, but again, I think it's unhelpful and dangerous to rattle sabers and speculate.
Bluster, that's how he described it. He was also asked about those comments a couple of days ago about the objective being to weaken Russia. He said we need to make sure we don't have, that Russia doesn't have the same capability to. Gaidai, thank you so much for your patience, first of all, waiting whilst we were listening to the Defence Secretary. Describe to me, first of all, how intense the Russian attacks are now.
There are daily attempts to go through to Popasna and Rubizhna and in the direction of Severodonetsk.
Now, Ukraine says they have repelled 6 enemy attacks in Donetsk.
This area is under constant shelling, and there are lots of casualties there. Lots of our equipment was destroyed there. We are defending this territory over the last 2 months. A big number of Russian soldiers aid. It's arranged centrally from the West and from the government of Ukraine. We constantly deliver this assistance, but the situation is critical in terms. Важливими будуть наступні кілька тижнів у введенні цих боїв.
Дуже важливими, тому що єдине, що
Very
може
important,
взагалі
because the only thing that could save
це якщо його війська
In Myanmar, we go inside the resistance, a people's army prepared to sacrifice everything to restore democracy. Our world.
And its allies meet in Germany to pledge more weapons for Ukraine. The US Defence Secretary says the group will meet once a month to discuss Ukraine's defence needs. And more than 2 months since the invasion of Ukraine, many of those who fled the war are trying.
From devolving into, honestly, a lot of garbage. I mean, content moderation is there to try to protect us from hate speech, to try to protect us from harm to children.
John Simpson about the various headlines of where we are in this third month now of this war. And John, in terms of that meeting there going on in Moscow, what is your assessment? Because
we're at that stage where both sides still think they can do well. The Russians think they can capture Mariupol, that they can get the many more gains in the Donbass. I don't know about naive, but I do think, well, certainly the Ukrainians believe it was a serious mistake and they're quite offended by it. They say that Mr. Guterres should have seen the disaster that the wants to try to worry the West into giving up the supply of weaponry to Ukraine, which is the one thing that is going to halt the Russian advance everywhere, and perhaps
of April, but we had not heard anything about baby's visa till about 18th of April, so after the Easter. And the actual visa decision, though it was issued on 14th of April,